In 2024, you made 3 predictions that have come perfectly true, like Trump would start a war with Iran. And you've made a series of new predictions.
Yes, and I'll explain each prediction one by one. Okay, so first, I predict that Trump will get a 3rd term.
But isn't this constitutionally illegal?
It's not. The president now has emergency war powers, and so he can actually delay the election. My second prediction is Iran is now a forever war, and the United States will institute a national draft, meaning that if you're between 18 to 24 in America and you're male, you'll be automatically put into the draft system. And they just passed a law that says that starting in December, you will be automatically registered.
Which means you're obliged to go and fight.
Exactly. Next, the world will move towards an AI surveillance state. So everything you do online is being recorded to figure out how to control you. And then this is the most controversial prediction. This is pretty bad. And I'll explain why. And also, I will tell you why this war can only lead to World War III. Why there's a very strong possibility that the American empire will collapse. And also, I'll show you what the Russians will do and how the private bankers are controlling you.
I'm not owned by anybody.
That's what you think.
So let's talk about that.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you are great or doing great for wherever you're watching this video from. As you know, I'm your host and presenter Agent Stories. Now, you all have seen Professor Jiang. I've hosted him on my channel. I've done some of his videos and we have seen his way of thinking. And I think it is interesting that this geopolitical commentator is predicting the Third World War. And honestly, when you get to look at the trail and how things really happened, because I'm a person who is really interested in geopolitics, and I'm really looking at the world and seeing what Professor Jiang is trying to say, and I cannot agree much further longer. Although we have people who criticize his works, but that's constructive. That's what's expected, right? Not everyone will agree with what you do. But hey, there is this podcast that he did on, most of you know, The Diary of a CEO. The channel of Professor Jiang is called Predictive History. It's a collaboration that they did. What I really find interesting about this video is that it highlighted that part that I feel like Americans need to have a look at. What people are not looking at. How do we call it? The blind side of the brain of people. What people are not saying. Because Donald Trump has led America with a Ponzi scheme. He has been lying. He has been draining people's pockets. He has been draining Americans' people's pockets. By the way, America responds to fights. And so, Third World War is so eminent because this is what Trump is planning for Americans. So if you ask yourself, where do the taxes we pay, where do the money we pay, all this goes, you understand it funds all these wars that benefits Mr. Donald Trump, and it benefits him in the decision that he do, because he's a guy that does everything for his own benefit. Brothers and sisters, buckle up for this video. It's gonna be a good one. But in the end, I think the most important thing is that I'm not a professional. I'm just a person who loves geopolitics. And I decided to watch you do this video, and that's the most interesting things. And with that, I'll be back. I'll be giving my comments in regards to what people really think about Professor Jiang's prediction, in regards to what is really happening and what we are currently seeing. So brothers and sisters, stay tuned as you watch the video. You know I'll be back, and then we'll be sharing this information together. I'm your host and presenter Agent Stories. There are 2 channels involved. 1, The Diary of a CEO, and 2, Predictive History. All these minds came together and discussed this a spectacular topic that is so relevant to the Americas today. So stay tuned as you watch the video. I'll be back.
Professor Jiang, there's so much going on in the world at the moment that it's quite confusing for an ordinary person like me. And you've blown up across the internet because you've been able to demystify all of this craziness, but also because in 2024, you made 3 predictions that have come perfectly true. Some might say unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes.
What were those 3 predictions?
My first prediction was that Trump would win in November 2024. Second prediction is that he would start a war against Iran. And the third prediction is that the United States would lose this war. And in losing this war, this would radically reshape the geopolitical landscape.
How did you know that Trump would start a war with Iran?
The simple answer is this. The United States have invaded Iran because it has no choice in the matter. If it were not to invade Iran, it would lose its empire. Its empire is based purely on the US dollar, the petrodollar, which is a Ponzi scheme. If it did not invade Iran, then people would choose not to trade with it anymore. People would choose to not buy US treasuries.
Why?
For the longest time, this system worked fine. But then in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay. That was not the issue. The issue was the American response. The American response was to sanction Russia and remove Russia from the SWIFT global payment system. It also ordered the Europeans to freeze over $200 billion in Russian assets. And this is a problem because the very basis for having the US dollar as the global reserve currency is that it would remain politically neutral. The Americans guaranteed seamless, politically neutral international exchange. So if this trend continues, right, if you don't do anything about Russia, Russia would take over Ukraine. And Russia then would build an alliance with China and Iran. If you look at these three countries on a map, Russia, China, and Iran, this is the entire Asian continent. And then what they can do is this. They can say, okay, the United States is a bully. They force us to play by the rules. And they get very angry if we don't play by the rules. So let's not play with the United States anymore. Let's just trade amongst ourselves. And then what they can do is they can build a Eurasian railway system connecting Russia, Iran, and China together. And then what this would do is negate American sea power because it's American ships that patrol and protect the oceans. And then what would happen is the world, Europe, Middle East, Africa, India, East Asia, would look at this trading bloc and think to themselves, wow, these guys, the Russians, Iranians, and Chinese, they use gold as their medium of exchange. Gold is valuable. The Americans, on the other hand, use US dollars as the medium of exchange, which is not valuable. So am I better off with the American system, with this new BRICS system?
What's BRICS?
It's an acronym. It stands for Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, China.
So am I right in thinking, because Iran, Russia, and China were colluding, it threatened US dominance, which is driven by the world using the dollar as the primary currency for trading?
That's correct.
Okay. So they felt they needed to invade because then they can control more of the Middle East?
Right. So by attacking Iran, certain things happen. Okay? The first thing that happened is that China is now cut off from Middle East energy. China receives anywhere between 50 to 6% of its energy needs from the Middle East. Not just Iran, but also Qatar and Saudi Arabia. A lot of people say that China today, it's reliant on renewables, solar, wind, and that's true to a certain extent. But remember that China, it is an industrial powerhouse. So it needs energy from everywhere and everyone. So the fact that China is losing all this energy from the Middle East presents China with a long-term strategic vulnerability. Okay, that's the first thing that happens. Second thing that happens is that Europe is in a lot of trouble. Because remember, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russian energy was sanctioned. And so Europe relied more on the Middle East for its energy needs, especially Qatar. And now Europe has lost all of this oil. And then you have Japan and South Korea. These two powerful East Asian economies are also reliant on the Middle East for its energy. So now the question is, if you're not getting your energy from the Middle East, where can you get your energy from? And there's only two answers, either Russia or the United States. Russia is at war. And what's happening is the Ukrainian drones are attacking Russian oil refineries and export hubs. So the world in the short term has no choice but to look to America for its energy needs. And what did Trump do recently? He took over Venezuela, which has the world's greatest oil reserves. He's threatening Canada. He's threatening Greenland, Mexico, Colombia. If Trump controls the entire Western Hemisphere, the entire world has to beg Trump for energy and resources. And this saves both the US dollar as well as the American empire.
So as part of your prediction in 2024, I believe it was, you said that the US would lose this war.
Right.
Why did you predict that the US will lose this war with Iran?
Because the American society does not have the political will, does not have the manufacturing capacity, and does not have the risk tolerance to fight this war in Iran. Basically, America wants to fight this war as cheaply, as easily, and as quickly as possible, right? So Trump really thought that, if I sent my airplanes to strike Tehran and kill the Ayatollah, they would just surrender. That was like literally his plan going into this war. He paid no attention to the culture. He paid no attention to the history of the Iranian people. He had absolutely no respect for the nation. And when you do that, when you disrespect your opponent, when you underestimate your opponent, and when you yourself are not willing to commit to the fight, you're going to lose.
So is Iran's game just to draw this out as long as they possibly can? How are they, because he's taken out the leaders. And then do you also think that Trump thought that if I just bomb the leader, then everything will sort of regenerate itself and we'll be fine? What was the sort of fundamental misunderstanding?
There's a lot of confusion as to how this war started. Even today, no one actually knows how this war started. But I think that Trump, given his personality, he was convinced that if he killed the leadership of Iran, then they would have no choice but to surrender. And his proof of concept was, of course, on January 3rd of this year, Delta Force went into Venezuela, kidnapped Maduro, and they completely surrendered. So in Trump's mind, he wanted to replay the Venezuela scenario.
And he didn't realize that Iran is fundamentally different from Venezuela.
The short answer is he is a reality TV star. He thinks in terms of optics. He doesn't think in terms of like geopolitical strategy. The long answer is that the American military has become a very corrupt and insular institution that is trying to generate as much congressional funding as possible in order to fund the military-industrial complex.
Did he think that he was going to bomb Iran, the people would rise up, they would elect a new government, and that would be that, and then he could control Iran?
That's exactly what he thought. So what I want to do now is go to the map.
Okay.
All right?
Go ahead.
And show you what he got wrong.
Okay.
All right. So this is a map of the Middle East. And the first thing to notice about this map is the topography.
What does that mean?
How many mountains you have. So this is what's really interesting is that the topography between Iraq and Iran are completely different. And this is important because in 2003, the Americans invaded Iraq and they won the war in about 2 weeks. And the reason why they won the war is the Americans practiced something called shock and awe. And the idea of shock and awe is that it is a military strategy that believes that if you cut off the head of the snake will die. A decapitation strike. And so what they did was they went into Baghdad, seized Baghdad and the regime collapsed and the war was over. And they were able to do this because of the topography. If you look at the map of Iraq, it's all flat, it's all desert, meaning that you can just fly in your planes, cut off the head of a snake, and the war is over. There's absolutely no way you can defend against airstrikes because you're entirely a desert. Now, let's look at topography of Iran. And Iran, it's all mountainous. In fact, you can make the argument that Iran is a fortress. Okay? And so the first thing is that Iran can choose to fight a war of attrition.
What's a war of attrition?
A war of attrition is a game of uncle.
What's that?
Right. A game of uncle is where we don't have enough power to destroy each other. So what we try to do is we try to create pain points, leverage points, to force you to submit, to cry uncle, right? So because Iran is too large, and that's 92 million people, it's impossible for the Americans and Israelis to destroy Iran. So what you're trying to do instead is bomb enough targets so that they recognize that resistance is futile and is surrender. Okay? That's the extent of the strategy. But again, the problem with this is that one, Iran is much too big. Number two is that it is a mountain fortress, which means that you can hide your weapons and your military inside mountains, right? Which allows you to conduct a guerrilla warfare strategy against your opponent. And this is exactly what Iran is doing right now, where their underground missile bases are hidden inside the mountains, and then they're able to strike targets throughout the Middle East, primarily American bases, but also energy installations that are key to the American petrodollar system. And so it's a game of uncle where the Americans are trying to create as much damage as possible in the Iranian nation, and Iran, in response, is trying to destroy as much of the global economy as possible to force the world to pressure America to call the war off. So that's a situation we are facing right now. Second thing that Trump got wrong is how vulnerable the global economy is. Because the Iranians control something called the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? And as you can see on this map, the Strait of Hormuz, it's a very, very narrow piece of land. It's only about 33 kilometers across. You can actually swim across the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? And why this is important is the GCC exports 20% of the world's energy.
The G what?
The Gulf Cooperative Council. Okay, so the Gulf Cooperative Council are certain nations in the Middle East that align politically. So they include Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Iran, Kuwait. They've been exporting energy, but not just energy, but also a lot of byproducts of energy production, including fertilizer, to the world, primarily East Asia and India. In return, they've been getting food back. So most people don't appreciate this, but the GCC actually imports 89% of its food needs. And the reason why is that they become so rich these past few decades that the populations have blown up. And as a result, they have to feed their population, but they don't have agricultural resources. They also don't have water resources. And so they have two major vulnerabilities, which is food and water. And they have a lot of desalination plants around the area. And so...
What's a desalination plant?
Okay. So a desalination plant takes salt water from the seas and then through an electrochemical process turns it into portable water that people can use for drinking purposes and for agricultural purposes.
Okay.
Right? So as you can see, the entire area, it is extremely vulnerable to drone and missile attacks from Iran. So that's the second thing that Iran has done, which Trump did not expect. He didn't expect that the Iranians would close off the Strait of Hormuz. And how the Iranians were able to close off the Strait of Hormuz was just by threatening to attack any ships that wanted to cross it. The reason why is that these ships depend on maritime insurance in order to operate. But if there's a risk, a very high risk of being destroyed, then you will not get insurance.
Okay.
So it's not that the Iranians have said to these ships, you can't cross. It's just that the insurers refuse to allow these ships to cross because it's too dangerous.
And Trump didn't, you think they'd consider this before they started bombing Iran, that Iran would have some leverage in shutting down such a critical piece of water for, shipping fertilizer, energy, etc. You'd think that they would have known this.
Right. So that's what a lot of people say, that Trump's stupid, that Trump is hot-headed, that he was misled by the Israelis. And there's good evidence to support this. But I want to show you something. Okay, it's called the National Defense Strategy. All right. And so this is a document that was published by the Department of War. And in it, it explains what the American strategy to maintain global dominance is. And in the introduction, what it says is that for too long, America has been bullied by the world. America is a nation that protects the world. Yet Europe, East Asia takes advantage of American generosity. The Europeans don't pay for their defense, and so they put all this money into welfare, into their pension system. The Chinese have been giving America a bad trade deal. The Chinese steal American technology and then use it to make products that they sell back to the Americans. So the Americans have been getting a really bad deal for decades. And President Donald Trump, he's going to change that by doing 4 things, right? The National Defense Strategy calls for a 4-point program to put America first. The first thing that America's going to do is going to secure the Western Hemisphere. Why? Because the Western Hemisphere belongs to the United States.
When you say the Western Hemisphere, what do you mean? What region is that? Is that Canada as well?
So if you look at the map, we can divide the map into the Eastern Hemisphere, okay, and the Western Hemisphere.
Okay, so everything over here.
Everything,
Mexico.
including Greenland, including Canada, including Mexico. Every part of this area belongs to the United States. Therefore, you cannot trade with any of these countries without American permission, without paying a tribute to the Americans. And this is why that the Americans have parked 1/3 of their naval assets in the Caribbean today. It's to tell the Chinese and the Russians, back off. You want to come here, you either pay a tribute or you'll be attacked. Okay, that's the first point of this strategy.
Mm-hmm.
The Western Hemisphere belongs to America. Something that they call the Monroe Doctrine, okay, which is Trump's corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, so that's point 1. Point 2 is that America wants to reimagine its relationship with its allies. Basically, NATO needs to pay for its own defense. NATO needs to go fight Russia in Ukraine. America will provide support, it'll provide weapons and financing, but NATO needs to do more work. And in East Asia, South Korea and Japan need to do a better job of keeping China in check. Okay, that's point 2. Point 3 is specific to China. And the idea is the United States does not want to destroy China. The United States does not want to humiliate China, but China needs to be put in its place. China needs to respect the power and the reach of the United States. And how the United States is going to do this is by strangling China economically, right? So if you look at a map of China, most of its trade goes through something called the Strait of Malacca. And the Strait of Malacca is the most important maritime choke point in the world. All America has to do is park naval carriers inside the Strait of Malacca, and China will lose 90% of its energy exports.
But if they parked them there, China would still go through, no?
No, because you have to go for the Strait of Malacca. So America has something called the first island chain. Okay? And the first island chain prevents China from reaching the Pacific Ocean. The first island chain includes South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Malaysia. That blocks China from reaching out into the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for it to access trade, it has to go through the Strait of Malacca. And through the Strait of Malacca, it can access India, Africa, and the Middle East.
Okay.
Right? And so by positioning naval carriers inside the Strait of Malacca, it creates a blockade, and China would have to pay a toll in order to access the Strait of Malacca.
And the fourth one?
And the fourth one is to reinvigorate America's defense manufacturing sector.
So supercharge the US defense industrial base.
That's exactly correct. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So what this means is that the Pentagon a few weeks ago went to Detroit and talked to Ford and General Motors and said, you know what, because of this war in Iran, we might need you to stop making cars and start making more munitions and drones.
How do you know they said that? They published it?
They published it, yes.
Really?
Yes.
So the United States went to Forbes and GM and said, we might need you to start making weapons with your factories.
Yes, and they're happy doing this because the profit margins are much greater for weapons than for cars. This is the Pentagon, so you can charge them as much as you want, and they'll pay for it. Whereas you make cars, it's for the consumer market, and they may not buy your cars, right? So you're like Ford or General Motors, the best deal in the world is to go make weapons for the Pentagon to fight these wars in the Middle East that can go on for forever. So we're at the situation where, okay, look, if you read the news, if you talk to a lot of people, Trump's an idiot. And this war in Iran makes no sense at all. But then if you just read the National Defense Strategy that is on the Department of War website, and anyone can go there and download it for free and read it themselves, it's a very clear roadmap of what America needs to do in order to maintain imperial hegemony. And so let's just summarize the major points. The first major point is to maintain control over the Western Hemisphere and create a fortress America.
Which is why he invaded Venezuela, and he says he's going to invade Cuba.
Exactly.
And also Greenland.
Look at all the countries that he's named over the past year. Greenland, Canada, Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, Colombia, Nicaragua, Honduras. It's all the Western Hemisphere, right? And they're all together. Second point is to create divide and rule all around the world. So imagine a situation where in Europe, NATO fights Russia in Ukraine. In East Asia, China fights South Korea and Japan. In the Middle East, Iran fights the GCC allied with Israel. What does America do? America can now sell everyone weapons and resources and finance it. This would be back to World War II.
But it makes them weaker as well, generally.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Right? And then what would happen is that $40 trillion that America has in debt, it would disappear because it would be absorbed by the world. Right? So you can say, look, Trump's an idiot, but if you actually look at a map and how America wants this world map to play out, it makes perfect sense.
So the war is going well for Trump?
The war is going very well for Trump.
Really?
Yes.
But you said in your prediction that he would lose the war.
Right.
What's your definition of lose the war?
Losing the war means that America would send ground troops, Iran would survive this ground invasion, and this would be so politically damaging that chaos breaks out in the United States, and the U.S. ground invasion is forced to retreat, and the United States is forced to retreat from the Middle East.
And you still think that's going to happen?
I still think that's going to happen.
So you think the United States are going to put ground troops in, Iran are going to resist, and then chaos is going to break out in the United States?
Yes. Okay. So let me explain to you why ground troops has to be sent.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So in phase 1 of this war, which started February 28th, which lasted for about 6 weeks, the intention was to decapitate the regime. And you do that by striking Tehran, and you do that by striking the military bases and installations throughout Iran. It's what the Americans call shock and awe. And the point is to force the Iranians to call uncle. But that's not what happened.
To give up.
To give up, basically. Because what the Iranians did was they responded by attacking U.S. bases throughout the GCC. They closed off the Strait of Hormuz, and they rallied their people, okay? So rather than surrender, the Iranians basically doubled down. Okay, that's phase 2 of the war. Now we've gone to phase 3 of the war, where Trump has basically decided that decapitation does not work. And so what Trump's going to do is he's going to impose a naval blockade on Iran's naval blockade, right? And so the question then is, if Trump understands that decapitation does not work, then using game theory.
What's game theory?
Game theory is the belief that all of the world is governed by rules and incentives. And once you understand the rules and incentives, you can predict how people behave, because people will always behave according to their best interests. So in geopolitics, the nation states are individual players, and each nation state is trying to use its resources and its advantages in order to pressure other nation states to obey it. Okay? So Trump recognizes that the Iranians have closed off the Strait of Hormuz, but not only that, but the Iranians could also use the Strait of Hormuz to finance the war, meaning that now they're forcing ships to pay a toll, about $2 million, in order to cross it. And so this is a huge advantage for the Iranians. And so Trump has said, no, I'm going to blockade your blockade, negating Iran's advantage over the Strait of Hormuz. So if we think about it, again, using game theory, I want to discuss what the Americans will do in order to force the Iranians to capitulate. Okay? So I would say there's a 3-point strategy. The first strategy is economic strangulation. Mm-hmm. You basically destroy the state's capacity to finance the war. And there are 2 ways that Iran is financing the war so far. The first is using oil exports, right? 90% of Iran's oil goes to China. And this is Karg Island. Okay, this little spot here is Karg Island. And this is where Iran will export 90% of its oil overseas. That's the first mechanism. Second mechanism is the Strait of Hormuz, where the Iranians now can collect tolls, right? So what you have to do is you have to eliminate both of these finance mechanisms. You can close off both with a naval blockade, okay? So that's strategy 1. Strategy 2 is you need to create as much chaos within Iran as possible. You want to turn this fortress into a prison. Now, and the way you do that is by stirring up ethnic tensions in the country. So if you look at a map, ethnic map of Iran, what you will discover is that the Persian people are primarily in this area, in the middle of the country. But if you go to the borderlands, okay, the border areas, it's primarily ethnic minorities. And there are two ethnic minorities in the country that have always been problematic for the government. The first problematic people are called bullocks here in southeast Iran by the Pakistani border. They have a history of insurgency against the government. Okay. Second people that have been problematic are the Kurds, who are primarily in the northwest of the country. So if you are the US government, if you are the military, your strategy is to establish forward operating bases in these areas. A forward operating base is a spearhead of the military where you insert ground troops to hold an area in order to resupply, in order to push further into the territory.
Okay, so a forward operating base would be the US putting troops into the northwest and the southeast, and then using that as a way to move forward into Iran?
No, you don't want to move forward into Iran because it's too large. You don't have enough forces to move into Iran. What you want to do is this. You want to establish forward operating bases in these areas in order to arm and train ethnic insurgents.
Okay.
That you can also finance as well. And you do this because you want to turn them into cannon fodder. You have to force a response from the Iranian military, right? So if they come in with the army in order to quell these rebellions, that's great because now you can use your air power to decimate the Iranian military. Your problem right now is the Iranian military is hiding inside mountains. And so you want to force them out in the open. And so you want to create as many points of tension in the country as possible to force the Iranian military to respond, right? Does that make sense? Okay. And now your third strategy is to strangle the capital, Tehran, because that's where the political elite are. It's about a city of 10 million people. And the way you strangle Tehran is you deny them three things. You deny them water, electricity, and food. So you attack power plants, you attack reservoirs, you attack railways that bring food into the capital. And when you do that, these 10 million people in Iran will now oppose the government and demand a political settlement because they need food, water, and electricity to survive, right?
Is there a government?
Right now, there's a debate as to the true extent of leadership in Iran.
Because Trump's recent interviews, he's saying, he's claiming that the leadership in Iran are fighting themselves, but then he's also saying in other interviews that they don't even know who they're dealing with.
Exactly. Iran has a very unusual political system in that it's a theocracy. It's a religious government. It's run by clerics called the mullahs, in theory. And then there's a parallel system, the state apparatus, that actually takes care of day-to-day bureaucracy, okay, and that's secular. The mullahs control the morality of the country. They also control foreign affairs. So basically, this is important because Iran has two parallel military structures. You have the military, but you also have the IRGC. The IRGC are only loyal to the mullahs.
Which is the religious part.
Exactly. All right. So you have this divide in the country where the IRGC see this as a religious war, as a crusade to kill the great Satan, and they want to fight to the death.
And the great Satan is?
The great Satan is the American Empire.
Okay.
Which is the source of the misery that Iran has been suffering for the past few decades. And the IRGC, not only do they see America as the great Satan, but they also see this as a global conflict because they have proxies that support their beliefs, including here in Lebanon, Hezbollah, including here in Yemen, the Houthis, And of course, in Palestine, Hamas. Okay, and before, Syria was also part of their axis of resistance, but Syria has been toppled by the Americans and the Israelis. So the IRGC see this as a religious crusade that is global in nature. The political leadership in Tehran sees it completely different. They see this as a conflict primarily between America and Iran, and they want to reach a political settlement as soon as possible. And so, in other words, these ceasefire negotiations, it's really all for show. Because at the end of the day, even if the Americans gave the Iranians everything they wanted, the IRGC still controls the battlefield, and they would not surrender or seek peace terms lightly. Another problem in this situation is the IRGC practice something called the Mosaic strategy. Mosaic. The idea of the Mosaic strategy is, okay, you know the Americans were the most effective military ever in human history. You know that they practice shock and awe, decapitation. So how do you respond to that? You respond to that using decentralization. 31 provinces in the country with their own command and control that is localized.
So basically they have 31 different armies that have their own leadership.
That's correct, okay? And when you do this, it's a fight to the finish.
Why did they do that?
They did it because the Americans possess the most sophisticated surveillance technology in the world, meaning they can easily identify the leadership and they can easily track you down and kill you. So the only way around that is to decentralize the leadership and spread it around the country so that the Americans cannot kill everyone.
How does the central government orchestrate 31 different armies in Iran? How does it get a message out to them? I heard Peter Hegseth make a comment in one of the interviews saying that it takes some time for the pigeons to get out to the armies. And what he was saying basically is that when the ceasefire was called and there was still some missiles flying, he was basically saying that's just because it takes a long time to tell the 31 different armies to stop.
The reality is that given the Mosaic strategy, there's actually no way to coordinate these 31 different military operations. Because the Mosaic strategy was meant to fight to the bitter end. You do not stop until you completely control the Middle East, and the Americans have been forced out of the Middle East, and Israel has been humbled.
Okay.
So let's go into the specifics of what the Mosaic strategy is. The idea is that they have an eschatology. Okay? So an eschatology is an understanding of how the world should be and how we move towards this world. And for the Iranians, their eschatology is that Iran, in order to reach its true potential, needs to be master of the Muslim world. It needs to displace Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is too aligned with the United States, which is the great Satan. Mecca and Medina are under the influence of the great Satan. Because why are there US military bases in Saudi Arabia? So this war, from their perspective, it's a great opportunity to overthrow the corrupt leadership of Saudi Arabia, but not only Saudi Arabia, but the entire GCC, overthrow the corrupt governments of the entire Muslim world, and install governments that put God, Allah, first.
So they're not going to quit.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. Man, we all have really learned from the video, Diary of a CEO. I've also learned something so much important, something that I wish our college teachers taught us, something that I wish we would have learned in our schools. Because what Professor Jiang is giving is something that is so much unfiltered. The truth, what we desire to know. The truth, because all I'm saying from the comment section is that people are just saying that this is one of many shows that I have seen in a lifetime. One of the most important. He's a brilliant professor. We all have to agree on that. This is one of the most engaging interviews that people have heard. The video goes for 2 hours. If you want to see the full video, go to the Diary of a CEO and watch it. It's all there. You are going to be seeing Professor Jiang giving a masterclass speech, a masterclass talk in regards to everything that is happening in the world today and everything that we are seeing in the world today. I don't have much to say, brothers and sisters, because I've learned a lot from the video, The Diary of a CEO and Predictive History. So brothers and sisters, go check out those two channels. I believe that you are going to benefit from just watching the two videos. Right. So please go check out what they're doing. I'm your host and presenter Ejidek Stories. Honestly, I say that I'm going to be saying something at the end of it. No, I'll be lying because I've learned. I'm humble enough to learn and to understand and to really see what's really happening out there. For me, I watched the video itself is 2 hours, 11 minutes and 9 seconds. I took my time and watched all of it. But I cannot play the entire video. That's not right. Right. So please, let me know what you all think about this. Let me know what you all think about this. Let me see you in my next video.